Reese, during his communion thoughts, was already talking about, excuses, things that we say we're going to commit to, think we might commit to, and then don't actually fulfill those things. And a lot of us, we say, I'm going. This is the goal. This is what I'm going to accomplish, and then we don't do that particular thing for whatever reason. But we add this other element to it, where we come up with excuses for why we didn't. This is what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, right? And I want us to be thinking about those times where we actually could do something. We see an issue. We see something that needs to be addressed, some problem that needs to be solved. And for whatever reason, we just decide, it's fine. And we talked about that a little bit with this church family actually a few months ago. When we were talking about how, this concept that everything's fine, but everything is not fine. When we recognize that there's things that are going on in our lives that need to be improved, something needs to be different, but we try to convince ourselves, maybe convince other people, we're good. But we make excuses for that. We see an issue, and we don't do anything about it. And we rationalize it, we justify it, we make excuses for it. When I was a student in college, there's a friend of mine, and I may have told you about this before, I don't think I have, but there's a friend of mine who had a propensity, who had a habit of pinning people in their rooms. Now, if you don't know what it means to pinning somebody in their room, in the dorm rooms of our dorm, the door would open to the inside. Well, if you're on the outside and the door is shut, you can take pennies, stacks of pennies, and wedge them between the door and the door frame. And the more that you can get stacked in there, it puts pressure on the bolt. When you turn the doorknob, the bolt, comes out so you can open the door. You understand what I'm saying? It'll put pressure on that where that bolt can't slide out, and you're basically whoever's inside is locked in their room. I'm seeing blank stares. It's really an amazing thing. Kids, please don't try it at home, especially not to your parents. But you can penny somebody in their room. And we had a friend of ours that did this on a regular basis, where he would just go around late at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, and he knew a couple of guys in their room were sound asleep, and he would take pennies and he would start wedging them in between the door and the door frame. And then they get up the next morning to go to class, and you turn the doorknob, you think you can open it, and you're just stuck. You can't get out. You're locked in your room. And there were guys that would honestly, miss class sometimes because they couldn't get the pennies out. I mean, you just got to yank really hard, or you got to be on the outside and kind of chisel those things out. So he did this to me and my roommate one time, except that he added an extra element to it. He took a vacuum cleaner. He got into the janitor's closet on the hallway of our dorm, and he took a vacuum cleaner and put it in our room, turned it on, but didn't plug it in. And it had a really long extension cord, and he ran the extension cord out of our room, plugged it into waited until he shut the door, pennied the door, then plugged it in the hallway, okay? So it's about, seriously, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm asleep. All of a sudden, bright light from those old school vacuum cleaners, bright light, huge motors start sounding. Freaked me and my roommate out. And we hear laughter out in the hallway, and we're like, oh, man, we know exactly, we knew who probably did this, and go run to the door and try to pull on it, and we're stuck. And so the vacuum cleaner's still going. We didn't have the thought, the mindset to turn it off. We're just yanking on the door and yelling and all sorts of stuff. And we finally turned the vacuum cleaner off, and we can hear this guy and some of his buddies outside our room laughing because we're pinning into our room. So I call the guy next door to us, the dorm room next to us. I call him hey man, we're pinning in. You need to get us out. Come chisel the pennies out of our door so we can get out of our room. And I hear him get up out of his bed, and I hear the door open. And I hear, kind of muffled voices outside. And then he calls back. I can't do it, man. I'm like, what? He's like, I can't do it. They won't let me. I'm like, dude, this guy was a 300-pound lineman on the football team. I'm like, you can do anything that you want to do. I can't do it. Sorry. Luckily, we were on the first floor of our dorm, so we crawled out the window and got it undone that way. But the whole reason I tell you that story is because I was so frustrated with this guy that lived next door to us because I knew he could do something. And he just didn't. Either he thought it was really funny or he didn't want to mess with those guys or whatever. But he could have done something, and he chose not to. And I was really frustrated with him about that. Now, I want you to think about times when you've been frustrated with somebody else, when you knew they could work on that project, you knew they could do that particular thing that you were asking them to do, you knew they saw a problem that needed to be addressed, and they just, for whatever reason, I can't. and to come up with excuses for it. I can't get that done because, fill in the blank, whatever the excuse was. And then I want you to think about times when you've done that. Because we all have, haven't we? We've all had times where we see something that needs to be done. We see something that needs to be addressed. We see a project that needs taken care of. We've been asked to do something specifically, and we come up with all sorts of excuses of why we can't, even though we can. I'm not trying to start out this morning making us all feel guilty. I just want us to be honest and be real. Like, this is something that a lot of us struggle with, myself included. And so as we're talking about making no excuses and committing to doing things different than what we have been doing, I want us to be thinking about how we need to stop justifying not taking action, and specifically this morning, how we're going to stop making excuses when it comes to our families. Now, I'm not going to make excuses with my family anymore. This is a new year, this is a new time, and whatever I have done to make excuses for things that I should have been doing with and for my family in the past, those excuses are gone now. And I'm going to do what it is that I feel like God is leading me to do for my family. If we think about it, there's so many different needs that our families have. I mean, our family, whether it's spouses, kids, parents, siblings, when we're in this family unit, we have certain needs. And it could be a fairly exhaustive list. I'll give you a handful this morning. Every member of a family needs to feel or have a sense of safety and security in their home. Not just that we can lock the doors and it's a safe place to live and it'll keep us safe from storms, but this is a place where we can be genuine, we can be real, we're allowed to share with each other. We know that people are going to take care of us, we're going to try to take care of them. There's no abuse, there's no ridicule. This is a safe place to be. Our families need time. We need time together. We need time with each other, working on projects together, interacting with each other, building connection and trust with each other. We need actual time from our other family members. We need affection. We need affirmation. We need somebody to give us a hug, somebody to pat us on the back. We need our family to say, I love you, I appreciate you, I see good things in you. We need those kinds of things from each other. We need a sense of respect and a sense of value from our other family members, that we're not constantly tearing each other down. And I know we joke and we poke fun at family members, but we need to know. I need to know in the family that I'm in, whether it's me as a parent, whether it's me as a spouse, whether it's me as a kid, whatever it is, that I know these people value me. They respect me. And I want to do that for them. That we're not going to tear each other down, that we're going to listen to each other, and that if mistakes are made, we're going to apologize. And we're going to forgive each other. And it's not that our families don't need shelter and food and clothes and all those needs, but some of the biggest emotional needs, some of the biggest relational needs that our families have are often the ones that go unmet. It's not just limited to spouses. I know we talk about that a lot of times with our marriages. I mean, that's part of it. We have, maybe my spouse is starving for affection, affirmation, a sense of value, feeling secure and safe. Maybe that's something that's missing for my kids. Maybe that's something that even I could be providing to one of my siblings. But these needs in our culture, on a regular basis, are more and more, I'm not saying that the right way, they're going unmet on a more and more regular basis in our culture. A recent study that I found says that 40% of children in the U.S. right now lack a strong emotional bond with their parents. And of that 40%, 25% avoid their parents when they themselves are upset. When a child is upset, they avoid their parents because their parents are ignoring their needs in the first place. So when a kid who is having problems, who is having some kind of struggle, and wants to talk to somebody, wants to deal with that in some way, they avoid their parents because why? Their parents are already ignoring their needs in the first place, or at least they feel that way. Of those 40% that don't have this emotional connection with their parents, 15% completely resist having any kind of relationship communication with their parents because their parents cause so much stress in their lives. Another study this year revealed that close, positive family relationships that feature open communication, that significantly increases a child's likelihood to stay healthy, to avoid substance abuse, to avoid poor psychological health, to avoid risky sexual behaviors, and to avoid violent relationships. And this particular study went on to say that it really depends on how happy those kids perceive their parents to be with each other. And whether those two parents are in the same home or even in divorced situations, as long as those two adults, those two parents have a good, healthy relationship and get along well, that has a direct impact on a child's social behavior, on their social competence, on how they perform in school, on their overall emotional health. This past year in 2022, one study revealed that 85% of divorced couples cited some form of lack of commitment as the source for their problems. And that could be broken down in some different categories. Maybe it's just they didn't commit time to each other. Maybe there was an affair. There was distrust, and the level of commitment was broken. Maybe they never kept their word. They never did what they said they were going to do. But overall, just a lack of commitment was the source of 85% of divorces in this country. And I want to share these things with you because I want us to understand this is a problem not just out there, in here, even within our church family. Here in this church family and in our communities, we are struggling as a culture to have close relationships with our family members. And yet, even when we see it, even when we recognize it in our own families, my question for us this morning is, do we do anything about it? Or do we just make excuses for it? I may not be committed to my family. I may not communicate very well. I may lose my temper too much. I may be abusive. I may not spend time with my family. I may not be just completely honest with my spouse or with my kids. And whatever it is, I'm not meeting those needs that I just talked about earlier that all of our families need. And I may even see it. I may even recognize it. I may even acknowledge, man, this is a problem. But instead of being honest about it, instead of trying to actually do something about it and do something different, I just make excuses for why I don't have to deal with it. And there's a lot of different, I guess, categories of excuses that we offer when it comes to our families. Sometimes it's an excuse of what I'll call dismissal. I'm just dismissing the problem. I'm blowing it off. I choose to pretend that whatever the issue is isn't really there. And I say things like, if you think this is a problem, well, this is the way I've always been. I can't change myself now. Or this is the kind of house that I grew up in. I don't know any different. And while those things might be true, this might be the way I am. That might be the kind of house I grew up in. I don't need to use that as an excuse for not doing something different for my own family. But I'll dismiss it. I'll even say things like, it's not that big a deal. All families have problems. Yeah, they do. I don't need to use that as an excuse. And when I'm dismissive, when I dismiss the problems, I don't actually deal with them. I actually cause my spouse, my kids, my parents to feel undervalued, to feel unimportant, to feel like they don't matter. But it's not that big a deal. Maybe it's an excuse of fatigue. Here's these things my family needs from me. Here's the time we need to spend. Here's some things that we need to get done. Here's some things we need to do different. I'm just tired. I am worn out. I'm drained. I'm overwhelmed. I don't feel like it. We tried doing this before and it didn't work. And I want to acknowledge there's something to be said for feeling stressed and overwhelmed and tired. And we need to take care of ourselves emotionally. We need to take care of ourselves, our physical health. Physically, get plenty of rest. But I can be in the habit of causing my family to feel less valued because I'm too tired to spend time. I'm too exhausted to focus on them right now. And I can use that as an excuse for not fulfilling that need for my family. Maybe it's an excuse of stress. I'm stressed out. I'm anxious. I'm worried. And if that's a constant situation in my life where I'm constantly dealing with anxiety and stress and worry, then I probably need to deal with that. Maybe go to some counseling. Maybe talk to somebody. Maybe even get on some medication to deal with that. But I can also use my stress and my worry as an excuse to mask my own selfishness. I really don't want to spend time. I really don't want to do that particular activity. I really don't want to have to talk and communicate and all those kinds of things. And so I'll just talk about how stressed I am, how overwhelmed I am, how anxious I am. And hopefully you'll just accept that as a reason for me not engaging in doing things different. Maybe it's an excuse of retaliation. Maybe I try to justify why I lose my temper or why I'm not dealing with certain things or why I'm treating somebody in my family a certain way. And it really boils down to they did something to me. She said something that was hurtful. He did something that bothered me. They mistreated me. They lost their temper. He did this. She did that. And because of whatever it is that they did, I feel justified in retaliating. And I'll either do the same thing back to them or I'll completely ignore and not build any kind of communication or trust with that other person in my family. Why? Because they deserve it. They deserve the payback. They did this particular thing to me and they deserve for me to do it back to them. And when I'm focused on getting even with my spouse, when I'm focused on getting even with my siblings or my parents, when I'm focused on doing to them just like whatever it is that I feel like they did to me, that whole relationship becomes completely focused on scorekeeping and judgment and criticism. But I'll feel justified in doing it because that's my excuse. They deserve it. You know what they did to me? Maybe it's an excuse that has to deal with, something else or someone else. This particular thing or this particular event or this particular person is really important. And maybe it's my job. Maybe it's school stuff. Maybe it's, spending time with certain friends. Maybe it's spending time on social media. Maybe it's binge watching whatever my favorite show is. And those things really have my focus and they really have my attention. And I start saying, yeah, I know my family needs this, my spouse needs this, my kids need this, but this thing is really important. I've got to do this, or I need to focus my time on this. And I'll worry about them later, but right now, this is what really matters. This person is a little bit more important. And maybe we don't want to articulate it that way. Maybe we like that sounds bad, right, to say out loud. But that's what our actions demonstrate. And that's what our mindset is. I've got this thing. I've got this person in my life, and that's a little bit more important than they are. And that's okay because it's really important right now. And these are just some of the common types of excuses that I can use. When something could be improved in my family, when our relationship could be better, and I recognize it and I sense it, but instead of dealing with it, instead of working on it, doing something about it, I just make an excuse and hope that you will accept it. But like we said, we're committing here in 2023 to making no excuses. I'm not going to make excuses anymore, right? So how do I get better at not falling back into the habit of just making an excuse for why I'm not being the person for my family that my family needs me to be? How do I get better at that? If I'm not going to make excuses anymore, maybe this particular thing needs to happen. I'm going to give you a handful of action steps and we'll be done this morning. Here's some things that I can start doing. And I would encourage you, write these down, take a screenshot if you want to, text them to, I don't know, somebody later, put them in your notes app on your phone. Because I think these are things that we could all consistently be working on a regular basis. And it may not be all, every single one of these things that you in particular need to be working on. Maybe it's just one of them. Or maybe it is all of them, but we're going to start on this one this morning. But there's some things that we can be working on that will help us. If I focus on this particular action, if I focus on doing this thing better, it will help me stop making excuses for my family and start being who my family needs me to be. So number one, I need to prioritize. I need to make my family a priority. I need to move my spouse up on the list of important things in my life. I need to schedule time for my kids. I need to get off the phone and actually spend time with my parents. I need to make a conscious effort to not only schedule time, but also focus my energy, focus my attention, focus my finances on my family. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, this may be somewhat a familiar verse for some of us. In 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8, the Apostle Paul says, anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own households, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, most of the time, if you've ever heard this scripture used before, talked about in a class or talked about in a sermon, I've used this scripture in a sermon before to talk about how we have a responsibility to financially take care of our family, to provide for our families. That's part of what leaders and families need to do. But if you investigate this a little further, if you go back and read this in the original ancient Greek language that this particular scripture was written in, that English word that we translate, or that phrase that we translate as provide for, that Greek word literally means to think about or to plan ahead of time. So what is Paul really saying? He's not just limiting it to finances. What Paul is really saying is anyone who does not think about and focus ahead of time, what would be the best thing for my spouse? What would be the best thing for my kids? What would be the best thing for my family? Whoever is not thinking about that ahead of time, focusing on that ahead of time, they have denied the faith. It's as if they have said, my faith means nothing to me because my family means nothing to me. That's some strong words. And it comes down to our priorities. How much does my family mean to me? How important are they? And if I'm not thinking ahead of time, as I'm looking at this week, this month, this year, about how I'm going to focus on and spend time on and energy on, and sometimes finances on my family, I'm communicating to them, they don't mean that much to me. And if I'm wearing the name of a God who treats me as his child, I'm basically communicating to him, he and being a part of his family doesn't mean that much to me. Why? Because my own family doesn't. I've got to prioritize. I've got to switch my priorities and make my family more important. I need to honor my spouse. I need to honor my parents. I need to honor my kids. I may even need to honor a sibling. Romans chapter 12 and verse 10 says, be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above yourselves. And again, going back to the original Greek language, that word honor means to treat something as having extreme value, something that is worth a lot. I am to be devoted to one another in love and to treat one another like they have value, as if they're special. According to Dr. Willard Harley, one of the greatest emotional needs that a husband has is to feel like his wife is proud of him. And yet that seems to be, at least in our culture nowadays, one of the things that seems to be missing more and more in our culture. Watch sitcoms. Watch movies. How are husbands typically portrayed? Bumbling oafs who can't get anything right. And that starts to affect how our families view the husbands and father figures in their homes. When one of a husband's greatest needs is to feel like his wife is proud of him. How much do you honor your husband? Wives need to feel like their husbands see them as not just beautiful, that's important, but also intelligent and talented and gifted. Because those are some of the things that they so often doubt about themselves. And some of the things that they feel so undervalued in all sorts of different aspects of our culture, in the workplace and with other moms, with other wives, are constantly questioning how valuable they truly are. How much do you actually communicate to your wife on a regular basis that she means something, that she's important? Kids need to stop viewing and treating their parents like they're idiots who don't know anything. Sometimes we are idiots who don't know anything. But just don't treat us that way. They need to treat, Scripture talks about kids need to treat their parents with honor and respect. But parents need to treat their kids with the same. Parents need to help their kids know and sense that they have value, that they're important, that they mean something. Otherwise, they're going to try to find that value somewhere else. And if I'm going to make a difference in my family, if things are going to be different from now on, I got to stop making excuses for why I'm not taking the time, making the effort to make my family feel valued and honored. I need to start honoring my family today. I need to work on forgiveness. Instead of keeping score, instead of holding on to mistakes and hurts, instead of continually bringing up past failures, I need to let go of that stuff and actually forgive. I need to let go of hurtful words that were said. I need to let go of misplaced priorities. I need to let go of bad attitudes. I need to let go of mistakes. I need to stop dwelling on them and stop carrying those things with me. And keeping those things in the back of my mind and waiting for that certain argument or that certain moment where I can bring that back out and go, yeah, you remember the last time when you said this. Remember that one time when you did that. And you let go of that stuff and forgive it. Going back to my college days again, I'll tell you this story real quick. I wasn't always the best at keeping up with, laundry and cleaning and things like that. And so sometimes the laundry would stack up, and sometimes I would run out of socks. So for a while there, I was out of socks, so you know what I did? I just went barefoot in my tennis shoes, just, walking around campus. And I did that for, several days. Some of you are already shaking your heads. I did that for several days. You know what happens to your shoes when you go barefoot in them for several days in a row? They stink. You know what happens to that stench? I promise you it does not go away. And my shoes started reeking. And I'd leave them out in the hallway outside my dorm room. Just like I couldn't even have the same dorm room. But next morning, you going to get your laundry done? No. I just slipped my shoes back on. And that stench followed me around campus. You sit down and sit in the student center, and all of a sudden people are like, what is that? I'm like, oh, yeah, what is that? That's weird. And I'm trying to tuck my feet back underneath my chair because it followed me everywhere. Guess what? Resentment and anger and not letting go of the way people may have hurt us in the past. Guess what that does? It continues to fester and reek, and it goes with us everywhere. And it affects our jobs, and it affects our friendships, and it affects everything that we do because we won't forgive it and let go of it. Paul says in Colossians chapter 3, verse 13, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. What does he say? You might have a grievance. You rightfully might have a reason to be upset at somebody for something that they did or said to you. Agreed. Forgive it anyway. Why? Because that's what he did for me. Yeah, but you don't know. You don't know what they said. you don't know what she did. You don't know how much he hurt me. You're right, I don't. All I know is what we're called to do. We're called to forgive. Because we recognize how much we've been forgiven. And if I can get in a better habit of that with my family, that's going to make a huge impact. Real quick, I need to submit. I need to stop being selfish, to stop making everything about me. I need to choose to submit to you and to what you need and what would bless you. In Ephesians chapter 5 and 6, Ephesians 5, Paul says, wives, submit to your husbands. And it says, husbands, love your wives. And in chapter 6, he says, kids, honor your parents. And parents, don't make your kids, don't exasperate them. Don't make them all upset. And before he talks about all those different relationships and how we need to interact in those different relationships, in verse 21 of chapter 5, he starts out the whole conversation by saying this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. We are called in our families to stop making it all about ourselves and make it about everybody else in the family. Submit to one another. Figure out what other people in our families need. Why? Because we recognize that's what Jesus Christ did for us. That from his throne in heaven, he looked down and said, what do these people need? They need forgiveness. They need grace. They need acceptance. They need hope. And he left everything that he could have held on to and had every right to hold on to. He left it all to meet our needs. And Paul says, do you see that? Then because you see that, keep that in your perspective, do that for each other, especially your families. What does my spouse need from me? What do my parents need from me? What do my siblings need from me? I need to learn to submit. And lastly, I need to love. Not just with words. I mean, it's important to tell people in your family that you love them. They need to actually hear it. But it's also important to show it. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, beginning in verse 4, Paul describes love this way. He says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Here's my question. When you look at that list, does that describe how you interact with your family? Does that describe how you treat your parents? Is that a pretty clear picture of how you treat your spouse? When it comes to my family, would my family say that I'm patient, that I'm kind, that I don't get jealous, that I'm not arrogant, I'm not rude? Just go down the list. Because Paul says this is what love looks like. And if I'm going to love my spouse, I'm going to love my kids, I'm going to love my parents, it needs to look like this. Now, am I going to do all, 13 different things consistently all the time? No. But this is what I'm shooting for. This is what I want my family to see in me. This is what I want my family to experience from me. This is who I'm called to be. And if I start trying to implement these things in my life and my family and not make any excuses for it, imagine the difference that it's going to make. So maybe it's prioritizing, maybe it's showing more honor, maybe it's forgiving, maybe it's submitting, maybe it's showing more love. Which one is the one that I probably need to work on more, at least in my family? And there's some of us that might go, all of them. Okay, let's not get too overwhelmed with that. Let's pick one. What can I do a better job of this week? What can I do a better job of today? And then tomorrow commit to that again. And the next day commit to that again. And not make any excuses anymore. I'm going to honor my spouse. I'm going to submit to my parents. I'm going to love my family today. What kind of impact would that make? I guarantee you, it's not just going to bless your family. It's going to bless this community. We could change the world if we change our interactions in our relationships with our families. I'm going to wrap up. There's a story in the Old Testament, the book of Joshua, about the people of Israel that coming out of slavery in Egypt and going all the way across the wilderness for 40 years, and they get over on the other side of the Jordan River into this new land that God was giving them. The first city that they encounter is a city called Jericho. Huge army, lots of weapons, and huge walls surround the city. And they don't have a whole lot of weapons, and they don't have engineering to deal with huge walls around the city. They don't know what to do. And God says, I got you. What I need you to do is walk in circles around the city. And he gives them a whole process of how to do that. And they do that. It's been a whole week walking in circles around the city. And on the last day of them doing that, y'all remember the story? What happens? The walls completely crumble. Now, if you pay attention to the story, God says, here's what I need you to do. I need you to do your part. Go walk in circles around the city, and I'll do my part. What was God's part? Tearing down the walls. There may be all sorts of, if I can use this illustration, walls built up between you and your spouse, between you and your kids, between you and your parents. And this built up for a while because of words, because of actions, because of attitudes, because of mistakes. And instead of looking at that broken relationship, instead of looking at that huge obstacle and going, there's no way that I can do anything about it. It doesn't matter the changes that I make because they're still going to be mad. It doesn't matter the things I do different because everything's going to end up being all the same. Instead of having that mindset, what if I looked at my family and even those obstacles, even those barriers between me and that other person in my family, and I said, you know what? I'm going to do what God calls me to do. I'm going to honor, I'm going to love, I'm going to submit, I'm going to do those things that God calls me to do. And I'm going to trust that He can break down that wall. It's not up to me to break it down. It's up to me to do what He calls me to do. What if we committed to that today? So here in a second, we're going to stand together. We're going to sing a song together about God breaking down walls, about God making us new. And as we stand and as we sing that song, if you are just being honest and looking at your own family, your own mind, your own heart right now, and you're recognizing there's things that I could be doing different, there's things that could be better, and I've known it for a while, but I keep making excuses for that. Today's the day. No more excuses. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to do things different. You're welcome to come down to the front and share that with us and to ask, would you pray for me? Would you help me make these changes? And we will surround you with love, with help and support and prayer and anything that we can do. You're welcome to share that with us today. There's no judgment here. We want to help if we can. If that's something you need to share with us. And if you don't come to the front, if you don't move anywhere from where you're standing while we sing, that's fine. Would you start making a commitment in your own heart today? No more excuses. Today, I want to start honoring that person in my family that I haven't shown honor to in a long time. I want to start making my family a more important part of my life. I want to let go of that stuff that I've been holding on to. I want to start paying more attention to what my family needs from me. My family's going to know, starting today, how much I love them. No more excuses. But if you need help with that, this church family wants to help. So let us know how. Come forward if you need to while we stand and sing.